Hi, it's Robbie from Southern California with, yes, over 1,000 hummingbirds. And here you are looking out my kitchen window, and this is what I see all day from the crack of dawn until dusk. And we do have many more feeders around the house as well. Let's see, what's going on this week different from last week? I can see their numbers have increased. No, I can feel their numbers have increased. I'm literally putting food out all day. I was going through about 2 gallons a day. Once in a while, there'd be 3, depending on the weather. If it's cloudy, looks like it might rain, more hummingbirds come in. They may not be able to find enough flowers open, but on beautiful sunny days, they can find more flowers. So their numbers have now increased to 3 gallons a day. Now let's do the calculation. There's a guy that studies hummingbirds, and he came up with a calculation which is very interesting. Several years ago he did. He's from Arizona, and he's a hummingbird fancier, and his name is Stephen Russell. And he came up with the idea of studying them for so many years. This is how the calculation works. If you are feeding 1 quart a day, his calculations came out, that's homemade nectar, that you're feeding 137.25 birds. Let's say 137 birds a day, because that's how many birds go through a quart of nectar. Now that's a full quart, so when you fill up your feeder, if it empties at the end of the day, you've got about 137 birds there. Now remember, I've talked about this. A bird comes in and it can sit for 5 seconds to sometimes over a minute if they're lazy, take their time and drink. But when they leave, they don't come back for generally 15 minutes. And they may take longer if they find enough food around in gardens or hillsides or whatever. Sometimes they may not come back at all if they've got enough food, because remember, they're looking for not just nectar, they're looking for pollen, and they're looking for tiny insects. Now, if I'm going through 3 gallons a day, figure the calculation out, because you take 137.25 and you times that by 4, because I'm doing it by the gallons, and that's 549 birds. And if I'm doing 3 gallons a day, and it can go up soon, you times 549 by 3, and that gives me 1,647 birds. Like I said, and they come and feed and they leave. Now, how do I know that? Because you know how I am. Somebody said something, I don't believe it. I have to look it up and research it myself on anything, whether it's gardening or whether it's hummingbirds. Well, we used to have some pieds here. Now that's a bird that has got white markings on it. There's a lot of domestic birds you can buy at the store. Let's say cockatiels. Some of you are familiar with that, and you see the pieds. Instead of being, let's say, the normal colored gray, they have white on them. Well, we had a couple hummingbirds a few years ago like that, and they were distinctly marked differently. And they would come in and they would feed, and then I wouldn't see them for X amount of time. Well, after researching it and watching them, they didn't come back for at least 15 minutes, and sometimes they didn't come back for 30 minutes. And that's how I learned myself that the birds you see coming back and forth may not be the same bird. You think it may be, but there's a good chance it is not. So that's how the calculation works. So right now, I'm going to say, since the number comes out to be 1,647 birds, because I'm going through a solid 3 gallons a day, and I think it's going to increase really soon. And that's the nectar, and I'll get into that in a minute, that I make at home. I think it's safe to say we've got quite a few birds here. And so I do see an increase by close to a half a gallon to a gallon extra a day. Now, the formula is very easy to make. I know some of you want to buy it. A lot of them you buy in the store have the dye in it. I do not put dye in it. They don't need it, and it could hinder them. So I'm not saying it will, but you don't know. Even if a couple drops, some of you say it's a couple drops. I know sometimes you want to put the dye in there so you can see it, but let me tell you something. They're not coming to it because of the dye. They know it's there. They know the feeders are coming to it because they need that food. So why not give them the best of the best, which is keep the dye out. If you can, get cane sugar, and if not, beet sugar is fine too. You may not know it's beet sugar. If it just says white granulated sugar and it doesn't say cane, then it's going to be beet sugar or sugar beet. If it says cane, then it's cane. And if you're trying to stay away from GMO, let me tell you something. A lot of the cane sugar is now GMO. So get the best sugar you can. Get the sugar you can afford. With the holidays right now, sugar is going to go on sale. the white granulated sugar. Do not get brown sugar. Do not get powdered sugar. That will end their life. Just plain white sugar, it will be fine as long as you make the formula correct, which is 1/4 cup of white granulated sugar mixed with a cup of water. It's a recipe more than a formula, really. You mix, because it's going to be 1 cup no matter what when you're done. You mix that well. You can start off with some warm water to get the sugar to melt, and then you can top it, let's say 1/2 cup of very warm water, almost boiling, and then add 1/2 cup of cool water, tap water, whatever water. If you can drink your water, they can drink it. It's really easy. They love it. Sometimes in the winter, people add a little bit more, so this way they have a little bit more sugar. They really don't need it, but if you want to add an extra teaspoon when the weather gets cold, that's fine. It's not going to hurt them. Just don't overdo it. And that's basically it. So I'm going to say right now we've got a good 1,600 plus birds here. How many will stay? I'm going to have to say lots will stay because we always have a ton of birds here in the winter. And right now we're still in fall. As the weather cools, more come in as long as they can find food. We don't have any fighting because we have more seats. That's not feeders. More seats than birds coming in at one time. So if you've got 20 birds coming in, make sure your feeders will sit at least 10 birds at one time, because who knows, a lot of them may come back in at the same time. You want to make sure there's enough seats. And my feeders that I get from Walmart, I have nothing to do with Walmart. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I happen to like their feeders. They sit quite a few, over 10 birds. So that's why the birds are really happy. If they come in to feed and they're desperate, they're not just coming in to say, hey, I just feel like a drink right now, but they're coming in because they're starving and they don't see any seats. That's when birds start to panic, and that's when they take over a feeder and protect it because they think it's a flower and they don't want anybody near their flower as the flower or the bush rejuvenates formula. Because remember, once they drink it, if a hummingbird goes in and sips out all the nectar, it's not going to replenish for quite some time. So then they try to protect the whole feeder. But if you've got enough seats and they don't feel anxious, that's how we've got the birds here feeding really good. Occasionally we have one that wants to take over a feeder, but when you've got 1,600 birds here, and one bird against 1,600 doesn't work that well. Think about it. So that's the update now. There's more coming in. Our weather has been stable. We haven't had any rain this week. They are calling for rain next week. We'll see. We've had nice blue skies, and then it kind of grays up a little bit. Suddenly there's clouds, and then the clouds blow away, so it's kind of in and out. Our weather's been, in the 70s. We had a couple warm days that were in the upper 80s, but then it cooled back down. Nights are still mellow in the 50s, sometimes dropping down to about 48. So the birds are still very comfortable, still active in the garden. Our citrus trees have a few flowers, but I've got a lot of different flowers here. And I'm planting more and more flowers all the time. And plus, there's a lot of flowers still growing wild that are blooming like mustard right now, because though we have weed abatement here, and they went through and inspected, a lot of the hillsides regrew because it was so damp this year that there was enough dampness and the little bit of rain we had off and on to get the seeds to rejuvenate and grow. So I hope you enjoyed this. Leave your comments below. I'll try to do another one next week. With that, have a wonderful day, and don't forget to eat what you grow. Bye-bye.